She had a private jet, a penthouse, and a Forbes cover, so why was she shivering in a small-town garage asking a stranger for warmth? Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The wind howled through the alleys of Hartville like it was looking for something to tear apart. Snow swirled in frantic gusts, burying sidewalks and blurring the glow of old street lamps. Jonah Cole stood inside his dimly lit garage, pulling the zipper of his flannel jacket all the way up to his chin. He'd just locked up, the last of the day's work finally done. An oil change on Mrs. Darby's ancient minivan and a stubborn exhaust rattle on the pastor's pickup. He rubbed his hands together, stiff from the cold, and reached for the light switch. Outside, the sky had turned the color of slate, and the temperature was dropping by the minute. The forecast had warned everyone to stay in. "Coldest night of the year," they said on the radio. Jonah didn't doubt it, not with how the frost curled its way across his shop windows like creeping vines. He was halfway to his truck when he saw them, headlights cutting through the snow like a slow-moving ghost. They swerved, dipped, then rolled to a halt near the edge of the lot. Hazard lights flicked on, a sleek white car, out of place, too polished for this town. Jonah's boots crunched across the gravel as he approached, breath fogging in front of him. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a woman, mid-30s maybe, wrapped in a tailored coat not meant for this kind of weather. Her hair, dark and wind-tossed, clung to her cheeks as she looked up at him with quiet desperation. "Hi, T," she called out, voice thin against the wind. "Sorry, I think I took a wrong turn, and now the car won't start." Jonah glanced at the vehicle. European, electric, definitely not a regular in Hartville. "You can't be out here tonight," he said, already walking back toward the shop. "Come on, we'll get you warm first. The car can wait." She hesitated, then followed him without a word, boots crunching behind his. As they reached the garage door, Jonah unlocked it again, pushed it open, and nodded her inside. She stepped into the warmth with a quiet thank you, eyes scanning the grease-stained walls and rusty tools like she'd never seen anything like it. She hadn't. The wind slammed against the sides of the garage like it wanted in. Jonah Cole stood at the workbench, nursing a chipped mug of lukewarm coffee, trying to ignore the flickering overhead light that had been dying for 3 months. The silence was thick, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock and the occasional groan of the old space heater in the corner. He figured the roads had finally cleared of the stragglers. No one would be out in this mess unless they had to be. Then came the knock, 3 short raps. Hesitant, almost like whoever was on the other side wasn't sure they deserved to be there. Jonah set his mug down, eyebrows furrowing. He crossed the concrete floor and cracked the door open, letting in a blast of frigid air and a flurry of snowflakes. There she was again, the woman from the car. This time with her arms crossed tight against her chest, her coat damp from the snow, her breath rising in quick puffs like she'd been pacing. She looked like a movie still, beauty dulled slightly by the cold, polished shoes dusted white, hair stuck to her cheek. "I know it's late," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "but I didn't know where else to go." Jonah opened the door wider without a word and stepped aside. She didn't wait for an invitation, just slipped in, grateful but cautious, like she wasn't used to being the one asking for help. He closed the door behind her, shutting out the storm, and handed her the same faded blanket he used when the heater acted up. She took it with a nod, wrapping it around her like armor, then stood silently in the middle of the garage, unsure where to put herself. "Still no luck with the car?" Jonah asked, pulling off his gloves. She shook her head. "Won't even turn over now. Battery's probably frozen." "You warm enough?" She glanced at the heater, then back at him. "Getting there." Jonah didn't press for more, didn't ask why she was here, where she came from, or how a car like that ended up in a town like this. He just poured her a cup of coffee and slid it across the bench. "Sit as long as you need," he said. She did. The garage was never meant to be cozy, but somehow in the hush of a winter storm, it became a kind of refuge. The overhead lights buzzed softly. The heater in the corner rattled and groaned like an old man trying to wake up, but it did its job, casting out just enough warmth to make the concrete floor bearable. She sat on an overturned milk crate, still wrapped in the faded blanket, holding the warm mug of coffee with both hands. Steam curled toward her face, and for the first time the shivering seemed to slow. Her expensive coat was draped over the back of a chair, its designer tag poking out beneath a smear of grease. She didn't seem to mind. Jonah worked quietly at the bench, pretending to sort bolts in an old tin, but really just giving her space. He had questions, sure, lots of them. Who was she? Why was someone driving a car worth more than his entire property through the back roads of Hartville? But he didn't ask. That wasn't his way. Some people came into your life already talking. Others just needed the quiet. She hadn't said much after thank you, just that she needed to get warm, that she'd figure things out in the morning. Her voice had that edge, like she was used to being in control, but didn't have the energy to fake it tonight. Jonah handed her another blanket without a word. She took it, nodded once, and draped it over her legs. The silence wasn't awkward. It was the kind that settled between two people who understood the value of stillness. Outside, the wind howled like it was furious the door had been closed on it. Inside, the only sound was the soft clink of metal and the occasional creak of wood contracting in the heat. After a while, she looked up. "Thank you. Again. I didn't expect—" She stopped, searching for the right word. Kindness. Jonah gave a quiet shrug. Doesn't cost much to share warmth. She smiled, tired but real, and went back to cradling the mug. The storm could rage all night. For now, neither of them needed to say anything more. The garage had quieted into a rhythm that felt almost comfortable. The storm outside roared like it had something to prove, but inside, between the peeling paint and the hum of the old heater, it felt like time had slowed. Jonah leaned against the workbench, sipping from a dented thermos that had seen more winters than he cared to count. He poured a little into a second mug, slid it across the bench without ceremony. She accepted it with a soft thanks, curling her fingers around the chipped ceramic like it might anchor her. He gave her space, letting silence do the heavy lifting. After a few minutes, he broke it. "Name's Jonah," he said, glancing over but not pushing. She looked at him, eyes unreadable, then nodded once. There was a pause, too long to be casual, and then she said, "Call me Anna." He didn't question it, but something in the way she said it didn't quite sit right. Not a lie exactly, just a placeholder, like someone borrowing a name that didn't belong to them but felt safer than the truth. "Anna?" he repeated, like testing a word that might break in his mouth. "Well, Anna, you picked a hell of a night to break down." She smiled faintly, something tight at the edges. "Story of my life lately." Jonah let the conversation rest there. He'd met enough folks running from something to know when not to dig. People showed up in Hartville for two reasons: because they were born here or because they were trying to disappear. Either way, asking too many questions never helped. They sat in a still kind of silence again, each sipping their coffee, the sound of wind battering the tin roof above them. She looked around the garage, eyes catching on old license plates nailed to the walls. A faded photo of a much younger Jonah holding a wrench and a trophy, and a clock that hadn't told the right time in years. "You live here too?" she asked, voice softer now. Jonah chuckled. "Feels like it sometimes. Home's just 2 blocks away. But this place, this is where I breathe." She didn't respond, just nodded slowly, as if that made more sense than anything she'd heard in a long time. Anna, not her name, but tonight it would do. The snow had slowed to a whisper outside, but the cold pressed against the garage windows like it was trying to find its way in. Inside, the air was warmer now, blankets layered, coffee replenished, heater holding strong. Yet despite the heat, she sat with her arms wrapped tight around herself, one leg folded beneath her, the other bouncing just slightly, like her body was ready to run even if her mind hadn't caught up. Her phone rested beside her on the workbench. Sleek, new, the kind of phone that came with assistants and calendar alerts and emails that never stopped. She glanced at it often, sometimes every few minutes. Her fingers would reach for it, hover just above the screen, then pull back like it burned. Not once did she unlock it. Jonah saw it all. He was a quiet observer, always had been. It came from years of listening more than he talked. You learn more that way. And what he saw now was a woman waging a war in silence, one where the enemy wasn't out there in the storm, but folded neatly in her pocket, vibrating once every hour like a ghost trying to remind her it still existed. She didn't mention it, didn't say a word about the texts or calls she was probably getting. Jonah didn't ask. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to hear someone's backstory to know they were hurting. And the way she flinched every time the screen lit up told him more than words ever could. Instead, he kept busy, checked her car again, then swept a corner of the shop that hadn't been clean in years, all the while letting the silence speak for both of them. When he came back inside, she was staring at the phone again, unreadable. "You need anything?" he asked casually. She shook her head. "No, I'm fine." He nodded, didn't push, just refilled her coffee and sat back on the stool across from her. Her phone lit up again. This time she reached over and turned it face down. Jonah looked at her for a moment, then glanced away. He'd seen that move before, turning the noise off without turning it off. Some calls were harder to answer than others. Some calls you just weren't ready to make. And that was okay. The clock on the wall blinked 2:13 a.m., though it hadn't kept proper time in years. Outside, the snow had softened into a steady hush, the kind of silence only winter could bring, thick, muffled, and full of things left unsaid. Inside the garage, the heater clicked on with a groan, casting a dim orange glow across the cement floor. Jonah lay stretched out on the bench in the corner, one arm tucked behind his head, the other resting on his chest, breathing slow and steady. A soft snore escaped him, the kind that hinted at deep exhaustion, not carelessness. But she couldn't sleep. The blanket wrapped around her shoulders barely moved as she rose from the folding chair where she'd tried to rest. The coffee had long gone cold. Her body was tired, but her mind was electric. Too loud, too fast, running in circles it had been chasing for months, maybe years. She moved quietly, her boots whispering against the floor, careful not to wake the man who had opened his door without asking anything in return. She didn't know what she was looking for, maybe stillness, maybe herself. She drifted toward the back of the garage where an old workbench sat buried under parts, rags, and a tin labeled nuts, some bolts. Duh. There were framed photos hanging crooked on the walls, one of a young boy holding up a greasy wrench with a proud grin, another of Jonah beside an old truck, hands filthy, smile bright. They looked like moments that mattered to someone, moments that were earned, not bought. She ran her fingers along the edge of a rusted fender propped against the wall. The metal was cool, solid, real. Everything here had a story, a scar, a purpose. Not a single thing was untouched by time or effort. It made her chest ache in a way she hadn't expected. Wandering deeper, she found shelves stacked with handwritten notes, old receipts and a calendar from 3 years ago still pinned up. Nothing here pretended to be more than it was. She leaned against the wall, letting her eyes close for a moment. No blinking notifications, no boardrooms, just the smell of oil, the hum of the heater, and the gentle rhythm of a stranger snoring across the room. And for the first time in weeks, she almost felt human again. Morning crept in slowly, slipping through the garage's frosted windows in pale streaks of silver light. The storm had passed, but winter's grip still held firm, sharp, biting, unrelenting. Jonah stirred before the sun had fully risen, blinking the sleep from his eyes as he sat up on the bench, back stiff from the cold, and from sleeping on something meant for tools, not men. He didn't say anything at first, just got up, rolled his shoulders, and moved with the kind of ease that only comes from routine. There was an old toaster in the corner of the office, next to a hot plate and a jar of instant coffee that had outlasted several presidents. He plugged it in, tossed in a few slices of bread, and filled the kettle with tap water, not bothering to dry it first. She was already awake, sitting quietly in the same chair from the night before, blanket draped over her knees. Her eyes were alert but distant, like she hadn't really slept but hadn't moved either. When the smell of toasted bread and bitter coffee hit the air, she looked up and offered the smallest nod, as if to say thank you without saying it aloud. Jonah handed her a plate with 2 slices of toast and set a steaming mug beside it. No jam, no sugar, just breakfast in its plainest, most honest form. They ate in silence, the kind that didn't demand conversation, the kind that felt strangely natural. Then, halfway through her second slice, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, not timid, but careful, like she wasn't sure if the question had a place here. "What makes you stay?" Jonah looked up from his mug, met her eyes, and didn't answer right away. He let the question hang in the air like dust caught in sunlight. Then, with a slight shrug, he said, "I guess I like knowing what kind of man I am here." She didn't say anything back, just nodded, slowly, like that answer held more weight than he realized. They finished their coffee in silence again, but this time it felt less like avoidance and more like understanding. By mid-morning, the storm had retreated, leaving behind a powdery silence and the brittle kind of cold that made everything feel like glass. Jonah zipped up his jacket and stepped outside into the thin sunlight, boots crunching softly over a new layer of snow. The woman, Anna, stood a few paces behind him, arms wrapped tight around her middle, watching. Her car was still parked just off the garage lot, its sleek white frame frosted over like a snow-sculpted secret. He walked around it slowly, squinting against the sun's reflection as he brushed away the icy film from the hood. The design was something else, streamlined, no grill, seamless lines that looked more like a spaceship than anything built for the road. He knelt down and ran a hand under the chassis. The undercarriage wasn't just smooth, it was almost surgical, every bolt, every panel tucked away like it was made to be hidden. He'd never seen anything like it. And Jonah Cole had seen a lot. When he pried open the front access panel, his breath caught for half a second. There, tucked into the engine bay, or what would have been one in any normal car, was a set of components he recognized only from trade magazines and whispered rumors. Custom battery housing, adaptive drive module, cooling architecture unlike anything on the market. This wasn't just a luxury car, it was a ghost, a whisper, a prototype. He stood up slowly, brushing snow from his hands. "Where'd you say you were headed again?" he asked, turning back to her. She hesitated. "I didn't." Jonah raised an eyebrow. "This model, this isn't even in production. Hell, it's not even listed yet. You working for someone who builds these?" She looked away for a moment, jaw tight. Then she met his eyes and simply said, "I used to." He nodded once. Didn't press, but his mind was spinning. People didn't just drive around with a machine like this unless they were very important, very wealthy, or very lost. And standing there in the snow, arms wrapped in borrowed flannel and wind in her hair, she didn't look like any of those things. She looked like someone trying to disappear with a car the whole world would notice. Jonah crouched beside the car, the cold biting through his jeans as he pulled the fuse panel open with a gentle tug. The high-voltage components of the prototype weren't standard fare, but power was power, and circuits told their own story if you listened close enough. He adjusted the flashlight between his fingers, eyes scanning the unfamiliar layout. Most of the fuses were fine, just one blown unit tucked near the back. He reached for his tool bag, muttering to himself, when his elbow nudged the glove box. It popped open with a soft click, spilling a few papers onto the passenger seat. He gathered them without thinking, registration forms, a folded service spec sheet, and then a photo. It was glossy, professionally printed, and worn only at the edges. The kind you frame or keep in a desk drawer if it matters. A group of sharply dressed executives stood shoulder to shoulder in a glass-walled boardroom, suits, watches, power and tailored clothing, and right there, near the center, was her. Anna. Except in this photo, she wasn't wrapped in blankets or watching the snow fall from a garage window. She was standing tall in heels, hair straightened and perfectly set, a crisp navy suit buttoned at her waist, smiling, confident. Not just part of the group, leading it. Below her image, a bronze plaque sat on the wall in the background. Alexandra Westbrook, founder and CEO. Westbrook Automotive Group. Jonah stared at the name for a long moment, heartbeat heavy in his ears. Alexandra, not Anna, and not just someone who worked on the car. The someone. The mind behind it. The one whose name had been featured in automotive journals, finance columns, and industry think pieces. He looked back toward the garage. Through the wide front window, he could see her, sitting quietly, knees tucked up, holding the coffee like it was something to cling to. Alexandra Westbrook. He hadn't expected that, but instead of feeling angry or betrayed, all he felt was a heavier sort of understanding. Some people ran from failure, others ran from success. He placed the photo back where he found it, gently closed the glove box, and made no mention of it when he walked back inside. The afternoon sun had started to dip, casting long amber shadows across the garage floor. Jonah leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching as she stood near the heater, her back to him. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but full, like both of them knew something needed to be said, and neither quite wanted to say it first. He took a breath. "I was checking the fuse panel," he said casually. "Glove box popped open. Found a photo." She didn't turn around. "I saw your name," he continued. "Alexandra Westbrook." Still, no reaction at first. Just the hiss of the heater and the distant creak of snow melting off the roof. Then she exhaled, slow, like she'd been holding it for days. "So," she said, voice low, "I guess the question now is what you're going to do with that." Jonah shrugged. "Nothing. Just wanted to make sure you knew I knew. Didn't feel right pretending." She finally turned to face him. Her eyes weren't defensive, just tired. A deeper kind of tired than sleepless nights or long days. It was the kind of tired that came from pretending too long. "I left," she said softly. 3 days ago. I walked out of a shareholders' meeting, got in that car, and just kept driving." "No plan?" Jonah asked. She shook her head. "None. Just done. I was tired of being this person I built. Tired of the noise, the pressure, the meetings about nothing, and the fake smiles, and the boardroom chess games. I didn't know where I was going. I still don't." Jonah studied her for a moment. "You think running fixes anything?" "No," she said without hesitation. "But sometimes staying breaks you." He nodded slowly, letting that sit. He understood more than she realized. People didn't always leave because they were lost. Sometimes they left because they were finally brave enough to stop pretending they weren't drowning. She crossed her arms, voice quieter now. "I didn't mean to end up here. I just kept driving until the roads felt unfamiliar, until I didn't recognize the billboards, and then the car gave out." Jonah smiled faintly. "Or maybe it gave you a way in." She blinked at that but didn't reply, just sat down again, a little closer to the heater this time. Neither of them spoke for a while. They didn't have to. By evening, the light outside had vanished behind a curtain of thick, relentless snow. What had been a passing storm had returned with vengeance, winds roaring harder, snow falling faster, as if the town had been swallowed whole by winter's breath. Jonah stood by the garage's main door, peering out into the white blur. He couldn't even see the street anymore, just shifting walls of snow and the flickering glow of street lamps trying to hold their own. "She's not letting up," he muttered. Behind him, Alexandra sat cross-legged on a blanket near the heater, her expression unreadable. "How bad?" she asked. though her voice already held the answer. Worse than before. They'll shut the main road soon, if they haven't already. He stepped away from the door and pulled out an old transistor radio, fiddling with the dial until a crackling voice came through the static. County officials advising all residents to remain indoors. Roads impassable. Emergency crews limited to life-threatening calls only. He turned it off, so they were stuck. The garage groaned as wind pushed against it, rattling metal panels and causing the heater's flame to flutter with each gust. Jonah double-checked the backup generator in the back room just in case. When he returned, Alexandra was staring at the darkened windows like they might show her something useful if she looked hard enough. "I didn't mean to stay this long," she said, almost to herself. He sat across from her, unwrapping 2 granola bars from a drawer that had become his makeshift pantry. "Yeah, well, I didn't expect a billionaire to be sleeping in my garage either. Guess life's full of curveballs." She cracked a smile. Not the practiced professional kind, the real kind, the one that caught her by surprise. The lights flickered once, twice. Jonah looked up. "If the power goes, we've got backup. Won't be comfortable, but it'll be warm." She nodded. Warm sounds good. As the storm howled outside, they sat together in the glow of a garage that had become something else entirely. Not just a place to fix cars, but a strange little island in the middle of nowhere. Unplanned, unexpected, and for now, unavoidably shared. The next morning brought no sunshine, only a soft gray light that seeped through the snow-packed windows like a reluctant guest. The storm had eased just enough to reveal the damage. Drifts piled high against the garage doors, icicles like daggers hanging from the eaves. Still stranded, still waiting. But something in the air felt different. Jonah stood beside her car, the hood propped open, and a flashlight balanced awkwardly between his shoulder and chin. Alexandra watched from a few feet away, arms folded, her breath clouding in front of her. He looked over. "Want to learn something useful?" She arched a brow. "That depends. Does it require a business degree?" He smirked and gestured her over. "Come here. Radiator hose is cracked at the clamp. Cheap part, annoying fix, but not impossible." She stepped closer, peering into the tangle of metal and tubing like it was a puzzle she'd never seen before. "This is what you do every day?" "More or less. Sometimes it's fixing. Sometimes it's figuring out what someone's been trying to ignore for months." He handed her a wrench and pointed. "Right there. Loosen that clamp. Not too much." She hesitated, then crouched and turned the bolt, her movements awkward but determined. A few minutes later, her fingers were smeared with grime, her breath fogging the engine bay, but the hose was free. "Now what?" she asked. "We patch it. Heat, sealant, tighten it again. It'll hold until you get a replacement." She nodded slowly, watching him mix the epoxy and apply it with steady hands. "You make it look easy." "It's not, but it's simple." He glanced at her. "There's a difference." She laughed, a genuine sound that echoed off the garage walls and caught him by surprise. Even she looked surprised by it. "In my world," she said, wiping her hands on a rag, "everything gets replaced. Staff, phones, partners, even identities. You repair things." Jonah looked at her, his expression softening. "That's what happens when something matters. You fix it." She stared down at the hose for a moment, thoughtful, then nodded. "I think I forgot what that feels like," she whispered. He didn't say anything back. He just handed her another tool. It was just past noon when the front door of the garage creaked open, letting in a rush of frigid air and a blur of red wool and pink boots. "Uncle Jonah!" a voice rang out, high and bright. Jonah looked up from the workbench, a surprised grin tugging at his mouth. "Emily?" he called, wiping his hands on a towel. "What are you doing here? School's out?" A little whirlwind of energy darted across the garage, her coat unzipped, cheeks rosy from the cold. Behind her, the neighbor's teenage son gave a sheepish wave before quickly disappearing, clearly having been enlisted to deliver her. They closed school because of the storm, she said matter-of-factly. Aunt Kara had to work and said I could hang out here, but I brought my coloring stuff. Jonah laughed as she spun in a little circle, then caught sight of Alexandra standing by the heater. Emily's eyes went wide. "Who's she?" she asked, pointing in a way only kids could, unfiltered, curious, and completely unbothered by manners. Alexandra smiled gently, the corners of her mouth lifting with something almost shy. "I'm a friend," she offered. Emily stepped closer, looking her up and down. "You look like a movie star," she announced. "Are you famous?" Jonah chuckled, shaking his head as he crouched down to open a cabinet filled with old tools and paper towels. "Em, give her a break." But Alexandra crouched to Emily's level, her voice light. "Nope, not a movie star, just someone who got a little lost." Emily tilted her head. "Everyone gets lost. One time I got lost in the cereal aisle. I just sat down until my dad found me." Alexandra's laugh came easily this time. "That actually sounds like a pretty good strategy." The three of them settled into the rhythm of the garage. Jonah back at his tools, Emily sprawled on the floor with crayons and paper, and Alexandra seated beside her, asking questions and listening like she had all the time in the world. Later, as Emily held up a drawing of the three of them in front of a cartoon garage with big hearts around it, Alexandra took it gently in her hands and smiled. "Movie star or not," Emily said with a grin, "you're in the story now." The day faded into early evening, the kind that slipped in quietly without warning, coating the windows in a silvery haze. The temperature dropped again, forcing Jonah to light the old wood-burning stove tucked in the far corner of the garage, something he hadn't used in years but kept around out of stubbornness. It crackled to life with the smell of dry pine and the warmth of memory. They sat on overturned crates, Alexandra wrapped in a thick flannel blanket, Jonah nursing a cup of reheated coffee. Emily had fallen asleep in the office chair, crayon still in her hand, head tilted at an awkward angle. The room was quiet in the way only small towns know. No traffic, no sirens, just the occasional pop from the fire and the steady rhythm of the wind outside. Alexandra stared into the flames, her eyes unfocused. Her voice, when it came, was low and brittle. "I used to think success would fix everything," she said. Jonah looked over but didn't speak. He just sipped his coffee and waited. "I ran the meetings. I led the calls. I sat at the head of the table with men who thought I'd never make it. And I proved them wrong." She paused, letting the fire fill the space between them. "But every year I felt more like a ghost in my own life. I built the whole empire, Jonah, but none of it felt like mine." He studied her profile, the firelight flickering against her cheekbones, casting soft shadows under her eyes. She didn't look broken. She looked exhausted from holding herself together for too long. "My schedule was managed by other people. My clothes were chosen by stylists. I lived in a penthouse I never had time to enjoy. I was always performing, always proving something. But the worst part?" She looked at him now, eyes glassy. "I never actually chose any of it. I just kept saying yes until I didn't know how to say no." Jonah didn't reach for her, didn't offer platitudes. He just nodded slowly, like he'd heard the truth and respected it. And for the first time, she looked like a woman beginning to find her way back, not to her empire, but to herself. The next morning, the sky hung low and gray, thick with the promise of more snow. Inside the garage, the world smelled of oil and pine smoke, and the radio played soft static from a forgotten corner. Jonah was elbow-deep in the engine bay of a rusted old Ford that had outlived 3 owners and somehow still came in every few months asking to be kept alive a little longer. Alexandra stood near the door, a mug of coffee warming her hands, watching him work. He moved with an ease that made every twist of the wrench look intentional, almost reverent. His brow furrowed, jaw clenched in quiet focus, fingers black with grease. He didn't glance up, didn't narrate. He just worked, humming softly under his breath, an old tune that had no name but still meant something. She leaned against the wall, eyes tracing the careful way he cleaned each part before putting it back. He wasn't just fixing, he was respecting the thing in front of him. "How do you do it?" she asked suddenly. He didn't pause. "Do what?" "This," she said, gesturing toward the truck. "Love something so simple. Something everyone else would throw away." Jonah tightened a bolt, then wiped his hands on a rag and finally looked at her. "Because it stays," he said simply. She blinked. "What do you mean?" He leaned against the fender, crossing his arms. "In this world, a lot of things are loud, fast, shiny, but they don't last. People upgrade, replace, walk away. But this truck? It's been here longer than most friendships. It breaks, sure, but it doesn't lie. It tells you where it hurts. You fix it, it keeps going." Alexandra looked at the old pickup again, seeing it now as something more than metal and rust. "In my world," she said quietly, "everything's designed to be disposable. Even people." He nodded. "Not here." She held his gaze, something stirring beneath the surface. Not envy, not confusion. Something slower. He turned back to the engine, hands reaching once again for the wrench, and she didn't look away. The day passed without announcement. No chimes, no dings, no meetings that needed rescheduling or urgent emails demanding her attention. Just snow, soft, endless snow, falling like the world had decided to whisper instead of speak. Alexandra sat in the corner of the garage, curled into the worn-out armchair Jonah had once claimed was too good to throw out and too ugly to put in the house. Her hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold, but she didn't care. She wasn't drinking it for warmth anymore. She was drinking it for the ritual. There were no assistants, no schedules, no executives asking her to make a decision that would ripple through 3 continents. Her phone lay face down on the counter, untouched. Dead, maybe. She didn't check. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't because someone forgot to loop her in. It was because no one needed anything from her. Jonah worked nearby, methodical and unbothered. The sound of a socket wrench clicking echoed gently like a slow, steady heartbeat for the room. It was a rhythm she hadn't realized she missed. Every movement he made had purpose. Every sound had meaning. She closed her eyes and listened. Snow falling outside, metal tapping metal, the heater ticking every time it kicked back on. Somewhere, Emily laughed in the office, probably talking to her dolls or coloring the world she wanted to live in. It was terrifying, this stillness, a world with no urgency, no audience, just being. But beneath the fear there was something else, something that felt almost forgotten. Peace. Alexandra opened her eyes slowly, her gaze drifting toward Jonah. He was leaning over an old carburetor, brow furrowed in concentration. No rush, no performance, just presence. She realized then that she hadn't heard the sound of her own thoughts in years without them competing with the roar of ambition. And now, in a grease-stained garage, in a town no one cared to find on a map, those thoughts were finally whispering back. Stay. She didn't know where the word came from, but it echoed louder than any boardroom applause she'd ever heard. It happened in the most ordinary way, over a half-burnt cup of coffee at Rosie's diner. Jonah had convinced her to leave the garage for a quick breakfast. "You'll go stir crazy if all you see is tools and snow," he'd said, pushing a beanie into her hands. She'd hesitated, then slipped it over her hair and followed him into the cold, bundled-in layers that didn't quite belong to her. The diner was warm and familiar, walls cluttered with vintage signs and faded Polaroids of local softball teams. A bell above the door jingled as they walked in, and the smell of frying bacon wrapped around them like a welcome-home hug. They took a booth in the corner. Jonah ordered his usual, black coffee and eggs over easy. Alexandra picked at a blueberry muffin, trying not to meet too many eyes. But eyes found her anyway. Halfway through breakfast, a man at the counter, gray beard, wireframe glasses, lowered his newspaper. He stared a second longer, then polite. Then he flipped the paper around and held up a glossy page. "Isn't this you?" There it was, a year-old Forbes profile. Alexandra Westbrook, the reluctant visionary of Westbrook Automotive. Her photo was sleek, perfect, corporate. It looked nothing like the woman in a borrowed flannel sipping diner coffee. The diner went quiet. Heads turned. Conversations paused. She felt it coming, the question, the request, the favor. She braced herself for it, the familiar tightening in her chest. But it didn't come. The man squinted. Didn't know billionaires liked Rosie's muffins. Someone in a nearby booth chuckled. She's got good taste then. Another voice added, as long as she leaves a tip like one, she's welcome any time. The moment passed. The room breathed again. Plates clinked, laughter returned, and the world moved on without demanding anything from her. Jonah didn't even look up from his eggs. Small towns, news travels fast. Judgment travels slow. She blinked, stunned by the weight that didn't fall. No questions, no expectations, just a town that saw her name and still let her be. The moon hung low over Hartville, casting long silver beams through the garage windows. Most of the town slept soundly beneath thick quilts and heavier silence, but Alexandra couldn't. Not tonight. Something inside her had twisted into a knot she couldn't loosen. Maybe it was the recognition at the diner. Maybe it was how kind everyone had been since. No prying, no pressure. That was the hardest part. She'd spent her whole life surrounded by people who wanted something, attention, answers, approval. But here, they gave her space, which meant she had nowhere to hide from herself. The heater buzzed softly in the corner as she moved in the dark, folding borrowed clothes into the worn leather bag she'd tucked under Jonah's workbench. Each motion was deliberate, mechanical. Her boots thudded softly as she crossed the floor, her breath catching on the edge of a decision she hadn't even fully admitted to. She didn't know where she would go. Just away. Away before things became too real. Before this place became something she needed. She slung the bag over her shoulder and stepped toward the door, careful not to wake anyone. But as she passed the front office, she paused. The light from the street lamp outside filtered in just enough to reveal Jonah, fast asleep on the old garage couch, one arm draped over his chest, boots still on. Next to him on the table sat a piece of paper. Not a letter, not a plea. Just a single sentence, scrawled in ink that wobbled slightly from a tired hand. Stay as long as you need. No one's chasing you here. She stood there, the cold air pooling around her ankles, her bag suddenly feeling like a weight she wasn't strong enough to carry. The words were simple, unassuming, but they split her open. No one's chasing you. It was the first time she'd felt that in years. She didn't cry, didn't wake him. Just set the bag down beside the heater, pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, and sank back into the chair by the fire, and stayed. Morning came slow, golden light sneaking through the garage windows like it was asking permission to touch everything. Alexandra sat on the edge of the workbench, still wrapped in the flannel blanket Jonah had given her the night she arrived. Her hands were steady now. For the first time in a long time, they weren't tapping against a desk, flicking through emails, or gripping a steering wheel hard enough to leave crescent marks in her palms. The note Jonah had left the night before still sat on the table. 14 words that had cracked something open. She stared at her phone for a long time. Not because she was scared of using it, but because she was scared of what it meant to use it without falling back into the world she ran from. Finally, she picked it up and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The snow was beginning to melt, icicles dripping in soft, steady rhythms from the eaves. She could hear Jonah inside, humming along to the radio as he fiddled with an alternator. The comfort of that sound grounded her. She took a breath and dialed. The call rang once, then again, and then, "Miss Westbrook?" a familiar voice answered, surprised and breathless. Her assistant, Valerie, who had likely been fielding firestorms for days. "It's me," Alexandra said, her voice calm, not clipped, not tired, just real. "Thank God. Where are you? The board is—" I know," she interrupted gently. I just wanted you to hear it from me. A pause. I'm not coming back, she said. At least, not yet. Valerie hesitated. Is everything okay? Alexandra looked out at the snow-covered road, at the peaceful nothingness of it all. For the first time in a long time, I think it might be. Another pause, then a quiet, relieved, okay. I'll call again soon, but don't send anyone, don't tell anyone, just let this be mine. And with that she hung up. No orders, no schedule, no spin, just a single truth spoken into the world. She was choosing herself. And for now, that was enough. The garage wasn't a palace. It didn't gleam. Nothing about it was sleek or sterile, but there was a rhythm to it, a quiet hum beneath the clatter of tools and creak of old hinges. And day by day, Alexandra found herself moving to that rhythm, awkward at first, like learning to dance with shoes 2 sizes too big, but then slowly, naturally, without thinking. Jonah had pulled out a battered toolbox one morning and said, "If you're going to hang around, might as well earn your keep." She'd raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Something in her had been waiting to be useful, not important, not admired, just useful. They started with a crooked shelf near the parts wall. She held the board steady while Jonah drove in screws. When he handed her the drill, she hesitated. "I've signed billion-dollar contracts," she'd said, gripping it like it might explode. "But this is terrifying." He laughed. "That's because this actually matters." She rolled her eyes and pulled the trigger. By noon, they were elbow-deep in tire patches and reorganizing bins labeled with Jonah's messy handwriting. Random screws, definitely not trash, and might be useful someday. She read each one aloud with mock seriousness, and he groaned every time, which only made her read louder. Then came the oil spill. She tripped over an extension cord and sent a half-full pan of used oil sloshing across the floor. She froze. Jonah just stared. For a moment it felt like her old world had come back, where every mistake had a cost, where one misstep meant someone got fired. But then he burst out laughing, a deep, full-bodied laugh that echoed off the walls. She looked down at her oil-slicked boots, then up at him, and something inside her cracked open. She laughed too, loud, unfiltered. Joy that didn't have to be curated or staged. They mopped it up together with old rags, knees bumping, hands stained. There was no audience, no headlines, just the sound of shared breath and easy laughter. And somewhere between tightening lug nuts and restocking brake fluid, she realized, this was power, not control, not influence, but the quiet kind. The kind that lives in knowing who you are when no one's watching. And she liked it. The wind had picked up again that night, rattling the old garage doors and whistling through the eaves like a lullaby meant only for the lost. The lights inside had been dimmed, the heater humming its steady tune as Jonah locked up for the evening. Emily had already been picked up by her mom, and the day's work was done. Wrenches hung, grease wiped clean, the world quiet. Jonah was halfway to the back room when he heard it. Not loud, not gasping, just the soft, broken sound of someone trying not to cry. He turned and saw her. Alexandra, sitting on the concrete floor beside the tire rack, knees pulled tight to her chest, her face buried in her hands. He didn't speak right away. He just walked over and lowered himself beside her, careful to keep a few inches between them, not because of distance, but respect. For a moment she didn't acknowledge him. Then, slowly, she lowered her hands and wiped at her cheeks with her sleeve. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words ragged. "I didn't mean for you to see this." "You don't have to be sorry," he said softly. "Not here." She stared at the oil-streaked floor, eyes swollen, lips trembling. "I used to wake up every day knowing exactly who I was, what I had to do. I had answers, deadlines, noise now." She took a shaky breath. "Now I wake up, and all I hear is my own thoughts, and they're not as put together as I thought they'd be." Jonah leaned back against the wall, letting the silence hold her. "For the first time," she said, barely louder than the wind, "I'm not running a company. I'm not managing a board. I'm not Alexandra Westbrook, visionary or whatever headline they printed. I'm just me. And I don't know what that means. I don't know who that is." Jonah glanced at her, then at his own calloused hands. "Maybe," he said slowly, "that's not such a bad thing. Maybe now you get to choose." She looked at him, eyes glassy, and nodded once. She didn't ask for comfort, but he stayed anyway. And they sat like that for a long time, two people learning who they were beneath all the titles, in the quiet hum of a place where nothing had to be proven. The next morning brought sunlight that actually felt warm, a rare gift in the middle of Hartville's stubborn winter. Snow was beginning to retreat from the edges of rooftops, dripping from gutters in steady rhythms. The garage door was propped open just a few feet, letting in the crisp air, while Jonah worked on a brake job, sleeves rolled up, face smudged with the familiar fingerprints of his trade. Alexandra stood at the counter, organizing a bin of socket heads she now knew by size and feel. The quiet rhythm of the day had begun to settle in, until a truck pulled into the lot. It was newer than most around here, shiny, big city plates. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in work boots that hadn't seen much work lately, and a clean jacket embroidered with the logo of a national auto tech firm. He carried confidence like it was sewn into him. "Jonah Cole," he called, grinning. Jonah looked up, blinking like he'd seen a ghost. "Mitch?" The two men embraced with the kind of roughness that only comes from years apart and miles between. They laughed, slapped backs, exchanged half-sentences and memories. Alexandra stayed quiet, watching from the garage doorway. "Didn't think I'd find you still here," Mitch said, glancing around. "You always said you'd leave Hartville one day." Jonah shrugged. "Yeah, well, life got complicated." Mitch grinned and leaned against the truck. "I'm heading up operations at Westline Auto now. We're expanding. Need someone to lead a whole division. Big salary, full benefits, relocation. Could use a guy like you, someone who knows the work and the people." There it was. A door. A way out. Jonah didn't answer right away. He glanced back at the garage, at the mess they were slowly turning into something better. At the corner where Emily had drawn hearts on a cardboard box. At the shelf Alexandra helped him fix. At Alexandra herself, frozen in place, hand still in the bin of sockets, lips parted like the air had shifted around her. He cleared his throat. "That's a big offer." Mitch nodded. "Think about it. Could be the start of something bigger." And as he drove off, leaving tire tracks in the slush, Alexandra watched Jonah. He didn't look excited. He looked torn. And for reasons she couldn't explain, her heart tightened, because for the first time she didn't want to leave either, and now she might not be the only one with a choice to make. The night had stretched long past decent hours, the stars sharp against a black sky, the cold biting harder with every passing minute. A neighbor's truck had broken down 2 roads over. Fuel line froze. Jonah didn't even hesitate. He bundled up, grabbed his tools, and Alexandra went with him. No question, no ask, just instinct. They worked side by side beneath the porch light, fingers numb, breath visible, the truck stubborn and groaning with age. But eventually, as it always did with Jonah, the engine gave in, roared to life with a cough and a growl. By the time they got back to the garage, it was nearly midnight. Alexandra's hands were covered in grease, her cheeks flushed from the cold and maybe something else. She laughed as she kicked off her boots by the door. "I think my toes quit halfway through," she said, pulling off her gloves with a grin. Jonah tossed his coat over the chair, his smile soft. "You kept up just fine." The heater whined to life as the quiet settled in. For a second neither of them moved. And then she did. She stepped toward him, fast, like something broke free inside her. Like all the hours they spent dancing around it, laughing at nothing, fixing everything but this, it had all built to this one pulse of bravery. She kissed him. It was sudden, warm, honest. For half a breath he kissed her back, then he stepped away. Her eyes searched his, confusion blooming in her chest. "Jonah?" She started, the word barely audible. He looked at her, his voice low, steady. "Don't give me something temporary." She froze. His face wasn't cold, but it was honest, gentle but firm. The kind of truth that doesn't try to wound, just protect. "I'm not some layover on the way back to your old life," he said. "Not a detour. I've stayed in one place long enough to know what permanence looks like." She swallowed, throat tight. "That wasn't a mistake." "I know," he said quietly. "That's why it scared me." The silence that followed was fragile, like glass hanging in the air. And in that silence they both stood still, two people who had finally stepped too close to the line and now had to decide if they would cross it or walk away. It arrived in a plain cardboard box, no labels, no branding, just Jonah's name scrawled in thick black marker across the top, delivered by a courier who didn't ask questions and didn't wait for a tip. Alexandra stood off to the side, arms crossed, lips pressed into a careful line, as Jonah sliced the box open with his pocket knife. Inside was a gleaming set of tools, wrenches, torque drivers, digital gauges, all custom-made and stamped with the insignia of Westbrook Automotive Group. Polished steel nestled into foam, precision, and power in every line. The kind of set you couldn't buy in a store, the kind that only existed in private labs and executive circles. Jonah froze. His fingers hovered just above the tools, as if touching them would make something too real. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly, voice caught somewhere between awe and resistance. "I know," Alexandra replied, her tone gentle but sure. He turned to her. "I don't want your money." "It's not money," she said. "It's a thank you." He shook his head, jaw tightening. "This looks a lot like payment." Her eyes didn't flinch. "It's not. Payment is for doing something someone asked for. You didn't ask for anything. You just gave." She stepped closer, her voice softer now. "This isn't me trying to buy a place in your world. It's me saying thank you for letting me stay in it, for not asking me to be someone I'm not." Jonah looked back at the tools, then at her. Standing there in jeans smudged with grease, hair pulled back, no title, no mask. Just Alexandra, not Westbrook, not CEO. Just the woman who'd scrubbed oil from her boots and laughed at his terrible labeling system. He let out a slow breath and reached into the box, lifting one of the wrenches like it was something sacred. "Well," he said with a half smile, "I guess I'm keeping it." Her smile in return wasn't wide, but it was full. Not relief, something steadier, like roots finally beginning to sink. Because this time, it wasn't a gift from a CEO to a mechanic. It was something simpler. A thank you, from one human to another. The snow had begun to melt for good now, puddling in the corners of the garage lot, trickling down gutters in slow, steady streams. Spring was close. You could feel it in the air, in the way people talked again, walked a little lighter, looked forward instead of down. Alexandra sat at Jonah's desk in the back office, a mug of coffee by her side, her laptop open and blinking patiently. The cursor blinked too. At the top of the blank page, to the Board of Directors, Westbrook Automotive Group. She stared at it for a long time, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she knew exactly what needed to be said, and once she wrote it there'd be no going back. She began typing slowly, "To the board. When I founded this company, I did it with vision, drive, certainty. I believed we could change the world, and we did. We innovated, we grew, we broke records. But somewhere in all that movement, I lost something that mattered more than growth: peace. I built the machine and let it consume me. I forgot how to breathe. I forgot how to rest. I forgot how to be a person who could laugh without agenda or sit still without guilt. This past month I've remembered. I've remembered how to change a tire, how to fix something instead of replace it, I've remembered the beauty of silence, the value of stillness, the strength it takes to do nothing but be. I've met people who don't care about titles, people who don't expect performance, people who see the person, not the product. So I'm stepping down, not because I'm defeated, but because I've won something more important than market share: my life. You'll find the transition plan attached. The leadership team is more than capable. Let them lead with kindness, with clarity, with purpose. And remember this: power without peace is poverty. I'm not poor anymore. Alexandra Westbrook. She read it once, twice, then pressed send. Her hands didn't shake. Her shoulders didn't tense. She simply closed the laptop, stood up, and stepped out into the fresh, thawing world where nothing needed to be earned, only lived. It started with a camera phone and a waitress who recognized her smile. One quiet afternoon at Rosie's, Alexandra sat by the window sipping coffee, flipping through an old paperback someone had left on the counter. Jonah had run down the street to pick up brake pads, and Emily was off with her mom. The diner was quiet, just the clink of silverware and the low hum of a country song playing through the speakers. Then the bell over the door jingled. He was younger than most folks in Hartville, clean-shaven with a messenger bag slung across his chest and shoes that didn't belong in snow. He ordered a black coffee, then turned slowly toward her booth. His eyes narrowed, recognition blooming like wildfire. "You're Alexandra Westbrook," he said. She froze. The name hadn't touched her ears in days. It felt distant, like something that belonged to someone else. "I'm not doing interviews," she said quickly. "I'm not looking for one," he lied with a smile. "But this is a story." He didn't push, just ordered a slice of pie and left shortly after. But the next morning it was everywhere, online, on social feeds, headlines blaring in digital ink. "Billionaire CEO spotted in small-town garage, leaves fortune behind for simpler life." Photos taken from outside Rosie's, grainy but unmistakable. Comments swarmed, speculation, praise, cynicism, the usual digital chorus. Alexandra paced the garage, phone clutched in her hand, stomach knotted. "He's going to be furious," she muttered, more to herself than anyone. But when Jonah came in and she handed him the phone, he just blinked, scrolled, then shrugged. "People talk," he said. She stared. "That's it? You're not angry?" He set the phone down on the bench. "Alex, the whole town already knows who you are. They still let you be. Let the rest of the world catch up, or don't. Doesn't change anything here." She let out a slow breath, her panic unraveling at the edges. And when she looked up at him again, she realized something quietly profound. She wasn't afraid of being seen anymore. Not because the world had changed, but because he hadn't. And in a world that chased headlines, Jonah Cole was the only thing that stayed. The headlines had traveled faster than she ever could. Overnight, Alexandra's face was everywhere again, on news apps and push notifications, even flashing on the little TV at the back of Rosie's Diner, where the weather usually played on loop. They called her the billionaire in hiding, runaway CEO, and oddly, Queen of Grit. But Hartville didn't care. The next morning she walked down Main Street in Jonah's borrowed coat, hands tucked deep into the pockets. The sun was out, soft and forgiving, and the snow had melted just enough to expose patches of muddy earth and gravel. She passed the bakery first. Ruth, the owner, stepped outside with a tray of warm bread cooling in the breeze. "Morning, Alex," Ruth called, not missing a beat. "You still like honey on yours?" Alexandra blinked. "Yeah, I do." "Thought so," Ruth smiled. "Come by later. I've got a loaf with your name on it." 2 blocks down, the hardware store's bell jingled as Mr. Crawley leaned out the door, waving a flyer. "You tell Jonah I still need that alternator sensor by Friday, all right?" Alexandra raised a hand. "Will do." By the time she got back to the garage, 3 more people had waved. A little boy had asked if she wanted to come to his birthday party. "We're having cake shaped like a tractor." And someone's grandmother had pressed a tin of cookies into her arms with instructions to return the container. but not too fast. Inside, Jonah was elbow deep in the hood of a Chevy. He glanced up, saw her expression, and smirked. "They still letting you in the diner?" "They're offering me free bread," she said, setting the cookie tin down, "and asking if I'm staying for Sunday supper." Jonah chuckled. "Told you, this town doesn't care what's in your bank account. They just want to know if you'll show up to the potluck with real mashed potatoes or that boxed stuff." She smiled and leaned against the workbench, her shoulders lighter than they'd been in years, because here she wasn't a headline. She was just Alexandra, and for the first time, that was enough. The morning began before the sun. Frost clung to every window, and the cold had crept back in with a quiet kind of determination. Alexandra stood in Jonah's kitchen, her breath fogging the glass as she sipped her coffee, watching him pull on his boots with one hand and yank his old flannel jacket over his shoulder with the other. "Come on," he said, nodding toward the door. "We've got plowing to do." She raised an eyebrow. "We?" He tossed her a beanie. "You said you wanted to learn what real small-town winters look like." That's how she found herself gripping the door handle of Jonah's beat-up snowplow an hour later, bouncing over frozen back roads, watching as he expertly carved wide paths through drifts that had buried half the town overnight. The truck groaned like it had arthritis, and the heater coughed more than it worked, but Jonah grinned the entire time like a man who wouldn't trade it for the world. "Think the board would have let you do this?" he asked as he steered one-handed, plow scraping the pavement with a satisfying growl. "They would have made me sign a liability waiver first," she replied, laughing against the window pane. By mid-morning, half the town's main roads were clear, the sun finally breaking through, glinting off icicles like scattered diamonds. They returned to the garage, soaked, wind-chapped, and grinning like idiots. "Now what?" she asked, pulling off her gloves. "Now," Jonah said, shaking snow from his hair, "you feed the crew." And she did. She stood behind the small stove in the garage's break room, sleeves rolled, hair pulled back, flipping pancakes like it was something she'd been born to do. She burned the first two. The third landed on the floor. By the fifth, she had the rhythm down. Mechanics filtered in from the cold, stomping snow off boots, stacking plates, pouring syrup, laughing loud and full as Alexandra dished out stacks like she ran a diner. No cameras, no press, just pancakes, cold boots, and warm smiles. And as Jonah leaned against the doorway, watching her laugh with a spatula in hand, he knew something had changed. She didn't just look like she belonged, she felt like she did. The sign had hung over the garage since Jonah was a teenager, sun-faded, chipped at the corners, the paint long surrendered to the seasons. Cole Auto Repair in blocky, hand-painted letters that had once stood proud and now just looked tired. Alexandra stared up at it one afternoon, hands on her hips, brush tucked behind her ear. "I can help you fix that," she said casually, like she was offering to wipe down a countertop. Jonah looked up from the hood of an old Buick, brow raised. "You want to repaint a sign? I've built prototypes, managed assembly lines, and overhauled global logistics," she said, smirking. "I think I can handle a ladder and a paintbrush." By late afternoon, they had the old wood down and propped across two sawhorses, sanding the splinters smooth beneath the quiet hum of a spring breeze. He painted the base. She worked on the lettering. The sun dipped behind the garage roof as they crouched side by side, brushes in hand, shoulders brushing now and then in comfortable silence. She didn't ask him, didn't present it like a proposal. She just began outlining the new words, slow and certain. Cole and Westbrook Auto. He saw it before she said anything, watched the letters appear one by one, his name joined by hers. Not in spotlight, not in dominance, just there, side by side. He didn't stop her, didn't question it. When she stepped back, wiping a smear of black paint from her wrist, she caught him watching. Their eyes met. She waited. He didn't argue, he just nodded once. "You sure?" he asked, voice quiet. Alexandra smiled, not wide, not flashy, just full of certainty. "I've never been more sure of anything." He looked back at the sign, the paint still fresh, the sun catching it just right. It didn't look like a rebrand, it looked like a beginning. They lifted the wood together and mounted it above the shop entrance, screws biting into the frame with a satisfying crunch. No ribbon cutting, no announcement, just two names, equal, earned. And for the first time in either of their lives, they didn't need to explain a thing. The day was slow, the kind where the sun took its time rising and the radio played the same 3 songs on repeat. Jonah had just finished rotating the tires on an old Dodge when he found her sitting on the hood of her car, sketchbook open across her knees, pencil tapping against her lower lip in that thoughtful way he'd come to recognize. She didn't look up as he approached, just kept drawing, the wind gently lifting strands of her hair. "You working on a new engine?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. She gave a faint smile. "Sort of." He leaned against the fender beside her, watching her fingers move across the paper. It wasn't a car. It was a building. Simple lines. Open windows, wide bays. A classroom with a garage attached. Below it, neatly printed, Hartville Technical School, Automotive Division. Jonah stared at it for a long moment. "What is this?" She turned the page slightly toward him. "A blueprint for a school. Here. Local kids, adults looking to retrain, people who want to work with their hands but never got the chance." He blinked. "You're serious?" "I already started the paperwork, bought the lot 3 blocks over, full funding, no catch." Jonah's voice dipped. "Alex." "It's not charity," she said quickly, cutting off the protest she knew was coming. "It's legacy." She looked up at him then, eyes steady. "I spent years building things that made investors rich. I want to build something that makes people whole." He was quiet for a long time, staring down at the sketch. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't ambitious by her old standards, but it was real, and it had her all over it, the woman she was now, not the one the headlines kept chasing. "You'd teach?" he asked. "If you'd have me," she said. He laughed, low and warm. "You better. You're half the sign now." She smiled, leaned her head gently against his shoulder, the paper still between them like a promise. This wasn't just her next chapter, it was their first one, written in pencil, but bold all the same. The garage was quiet that evening, filled only with the soft ticking of cooling engines and the distant laughter of kids playing down the block. Jonah had taken Emily out for ice cream, saying something about sprinkles being non-negotiable, and Alexandra had stayed behind, alone with her thoughts and the soft scratch of a pen against paper. She sat at Jonah's desk, the same one where she'd written resignation letters and drafted blueprints. But this letter was different. This one wasn't for the board or the press or the town. It was for the girl she used to be. She took a deep breath, steadying her hand, and began to write. "Dear Alexandra, I know you're tired. You won't admit it, not yet, but I know. You're chasing everything, numbers, respect, perfection, because deep down you think that if you can just do enough, become enough, then maybe you'll finally be worthy of love, of rest, of peace. But let me tell you something no one ever did. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to prove it. You already are. You'll make mistakes. You'll say yes when you should say no. You'll get lost in rooms where people clap for your success but never ask if you're okay. You'll forget who you are more than once. But you'll find your way back, not through ambition, but through stillness, through kind hands and grease-stained garages, through people who see you, not your title, not your company, just you. One day you'll learn to laugh without measuring it, to cry without hiding it, to kiss someone not because you're ready, but because you're real. And you'll be loved, deeply, truly, quietly, for exactly who you are. So stop running, stop performing, just be. And when the world tells you to be louder, stronger, tougher, remember that sometimes the strongest thing you can be is honest. With love, me. She folded the letter carefully, sealing it in a small box Jonah had once used to store loose bolts. She tied it with twine, scrawled "For the girl I used to be" across the top, and tucked it into the cabinet behind the desk. Not to forget, but to remember, because sometimes the most important person to forgive is yourself. The garage opened with the same creaky roll of the front door it always had, the bell above it jingling in its usual offbeat chime. But everything inside had changed. Not dramatically, not loudly. Just enough that if you'd been gone a while and stepped back inside, you'd pause and smile. The sign out front read, "Cole & Westbrook Auto," paint slightly weathered from a year of sun and storms, but still proud. Inside, Alexandra Westbrook, yes, that Alexandra Westbrook, wiped her hands on a rag and leaned against the counter, flannel shirt rolled to her elbows, a pen tucked behind one ear. Her hair was messier these days, and her boots scuffed. The manicured gloss she used to wear had long since been replaced with grease smudges and sun-freckled cheeks. She looked like herself now, and more importantly, felt like it. She drove an old Chevy pickup that coughed a little on cold mornings, but purred after 10 minutes on the road. She knew the difference between a torque wrench and a breaker bar, and she could spot a cracked belt just by listening. Jonah came in from the back bay, wiping oil from his palms. He leaned over, pressed a kiss to her temple, and grabbed the day's work orders from the desk like it was the most natural thing in the world, because now it was. They opened the shop together every morning, sometimes with Emily giggling over pancake crumbs, sometimes with the radio playing too loud, sometimes in comfortable silence, but always together. And the town? They stopped talking about the billionaire who disappeared. They started talking about the woman who stayed, the one who helped build a school for kids who never thought they could fix anything, the one who brought cookies to Ruth at the bakery and helped rewire the lights in the church basement, the one who laughed louder now, hugged longer, and kissed Jonah every morning without ever checking a clock. Alexandra didn't walk away from her old life. She walked into a new one built on rust and roots, firelight and forgiveness, something real, something that finally stayed.